I never expected a simple walk home to shatter my carefully constructed world. That evening, as rain slicked the New York streets, a cab hydroplaned straight toward me at the crosswalk. Time slowed. My heart slammed against my ribs like a trapped bird, then strong arms yanked me back, pulling me against a solid chest just as the vehicle screeched past, missing me by inches. My breath caught, not from the near miss, but from the steady grip holding me upright, grounding me against the chaos. "Are you okay?" His voice was low, calm, but carried an edge like he was used to being answered. I turned, meeting slate-gray eyes under dark brows, his face half-shadowed by the streetlight. He was older, maybe mid-30s, in a tailored coat that screamed money, his jaw tight with something like concern. I nodded, too rattled to speak, and stepped back, my sneakers squeaking on the wet pavement. "I'm fine," I managed, though my hands shook as I adjusted my scarf. "Thank you." He didn't let go immediately, his grip lingering on my arm, assessing me. "You don't look fine. Where are you headed?" I bristled at the question, my independence flaring despite the adrenaline. I'd spent years building walls around myself, ever since I left my small upstate town where everyone knew my family's tragedy, my parents' car accident when I was 16, the whispers that followed about how I'd never marry, never trust anyone enough to let them in. I'd made a vow to myself then. No one would ever hold power over me, not my heart, not my life. That vow had carried me to this city, to a quiet job as a library archivist, to a life of routine and solitude. "I'm okay," I repeated, firmer, pulling away. "Just heading home." He raised an eyebrow, unconvinced, but didn't push. Instead, he gestured to the sleek black car idling nearby. "Let me drive you." "It's pouring and you're shaken." I hesitated. Strangers in New York didn't offer rides unless they wanted something, but the rain was relentless, and my apartment was 10 blocks away. Against my better judgment, I nodded. "Just this once." His name was Elias Kane, he told me as we slid into the car's leather interior. He owned Kane Enterprises, a name I vaguely recognized from business headlines, something about real estate and tech mergers. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy, like we were both measuring each other. His driver navigated the city with ease, and I stole glances at Elias, noting the way his fingers tapped restlessly on his knee, the faint scar above his left brow, the way he seemed to fill the space without trying. "Why'd you stop?" I asked, finally breaking the quiet. "You could have kept walking." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "I don't walk away from trouble." The words landed like a challenge, though I couldn't tell if it was aimed at me or himself. When we reached my building, a modest walk-up in a less glamorous part of the city, I expected him to drop me off and disappear, but he stepped out, holding an umbrella over me as we crossed the sidewalk. At my door, he handed me a business card, plain white with his name and a number in sharp black font. "If you need anything," he said, "call." I took it, skeptical. "I won't." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "We'll see." The next morning, I found an email from my boss. The library's rare books collection was being digitized, funded by a private donor who wanted a hands-on role. I was to meet him at the Kane Enterprises office uptown. My stomach sank as I read the donor's name, Elias Kane. I arrived at his glass-walled penthouse office, my nerves fraying. The space was all sharp lines and polished surfaces, a stark contrast to my world of dusty manuscripts and quiet stacks. Elias stood behind a desk, his presence as commanding as it had been on the street. He didn't mention the night before, but his eyes lingered on me longer than necessary. "You're the archivist," he said, not a question. "Clara Weston." I nodded, clutching my notebook like a shield. "And you're the donor. Why?" "I collect rare things," he said simply. "Books, art, history. I want them preserved, not locked away." His answer was too smooth, like he'd rehearsed it. I didn't trust it, or him. Men like Elias Kane didn't fund projects like mine out of pure altruism. There was always an angle. Still, the library needed the money, and I needed my job. I agreed to work with him, though every instinct screamed to keep my distance. Over the next week, we met daily to discuss the project. His knowledge of rare texts surprised me. He wasn't just a suit with a checkbook. He spoke of first editions and ancient manuscripts with a reverence that felt personal, almost vulnerable. But he was guarded too, deflecting questions about himself with sharp precision. I sensed a wound there, something he didn't want me to see. My own walls stayed up. Growing up, I'd been the preacher's daughter in a town that expected me to be perfect, pure, untouchable. After my parents died, I leaned into that role. Not out of faith, but survival. It was easier to stay untouched than to risk the pain of loss again. Men had tried to get close, dates, awkward kisses, but I always pulled back, my vow a quiet armor. Elias, though, didn't push. He watched, listened, and somehow that was worse. His attention felt like a spotlight on my carefully hidden self. One evening, as we pored over a 17th century manuscript in his office, a storm rolled in, rattling the windows. The power flickered, and the city's hum faded, leaving us in near darkness. He lit a desk lamp, its glow casting shadows across his face. "You don't trust me," he said abruptly, not looking up from the page. I stiffened. "I don't know you." "You could," he said, his voice quieter now, almost raw. "If you wanted to." The words hung between us, heavy with possibility. I wanted to dismiss them, to retreat to my safe, solitary life. But the library project meant working with him for months, maybe longer. There was no escaping his world now. Not his office, his questions, or the way his presence made my carefully guarded heart stutter. I stayed because I had to. The project was my responsibility, and I wouldn't let my fear of him, or of myself, derail it. But as I left his office that night, his card still tucked in my pocket, I knew something had shifted. Elias Kane wasn't just a donor or a stranger who'd saved me from a cab. He was a question I wasn't sure I could answer, and for the first time in years, I wasn't sure I wanted to run from it. The weeks following that stormy night in Elias Kane's office pulled me deeper into his orbit, a gravitational force I couldn't escape. We worked side by side on the library's digitization project, cataloging brittle manuscripts in his sleek uptown office or the library's dusty basement. Proximity bred familiarity, but not ease. Every glance, every brush of his hand as we passed a book, felt like a spark against kindling. I kept my walls up, my vow to stay untouched a silent mantra. But Elias had a way of seeing through me, his gray eyes cutting past my defenses without effort. I learned his rhythms. He arrived each morning with coffee, black for him, cream and sugar for me, set wordlessly on my desk. He never asked how I took it. He just knew. His precision unnerved me, like he was cataloging me the way we cataloged the books. But there were moments when his control slipped, when he'd pause mid-sentence, staring at a page as if it held a memory he couldn't shake. I wanted to ask, but my own guardedness stopped me. I'd spent years keeping people out. I wasn't about to let him in. Still, I noticed things. The way his jaw tightened when his assistant mentioned a family estate in Maine. The way he deflected personal questions with a sharp wit that felt more like armor than charm. Once, as we sorted through a crate of 18th century letters, I caught him reading one. A lover's plea, faded ink on yellowed paper. His fingers lingered on the words, and for a moment, his face softened, raw with something like grief. I looked away, my chest tight. I didn't want to see his pain. It made him too human. My own past stayed locked away. The library was my sanctuary, its quiet stacks a refuge from the small-town whispers that had followed me after my parents' accident. I'd been 16, suddenly alone, with a community that pitied me, but expected me to embody their ideal of purity. I'd leaned into it, not for them but for myself, a vow to never let anyone close enough to break me again. New York was supposed to be my fresh start, but Elias's presence was a crack in that plan, his quiet intensity stirring something I'd buried deep. One afternoon, as we worked late in the library's basement, the air thick with dust and the hum of fluorescent lights, he broke our usual silence. "Why do you do this?" he asked, gesturing to the stacks. "You could be anywhere, doing anything. Why hide here?" I bristled, my fingers tightening on a leather-bound volume. "I'm not hiding. I'm preserving." He leaned against the table, his gaze steady. "Preserving's a choice. So's hiding." The words stung because they were true. I wanted to snap back, but instead I met his eyes. "What about you? Why fund this? You don't strike me as the altruistic type." He didn't flinch, but his mouth tightened. "Maybe I'm preserving something, too." I waited, expecting more, but he turned back to the manuscript, closing the door on whatever he'd almost revealed. That was Elias, always a step ahead, always holding back. It frustrated me, but it also drew me in. He wasn't like the men I'd known, the ones who pushed or charmed or assumed they could claim me. Elias didn't assume. He watched, waited, and somehow that was more dangerous. The midpoint came on a night when a nor'easter swept through the city, trapping us in his office. The power went out again, leaving us with only a battery-powered lamp and the howl of wind against the windows. We sat on the floor, surrounded by open books, the storm a cocoon around us. I don't know why I spoke. Maybe the dark loosened something in me, but I told him about my parents. Not the accident, but the small things. My mother's laugh, my father's habit of reading poetry aloud at breakfast. I hadn't spoken of them in years, and the words felt like they were bleeding out of me. He listened, his face half lit, his hands still. When I stopped, embarrassed, he didn't offer platitudes. Instead, he said, "My sister used to read poetry too." She'd recite Frost in this dramatic voice, like she was on stage. His voice caught, barely, but I heard it. "She died 5 years ago, cancer." I froze, the air between us suddenly fragile. "I'm sorry," I said, hating how inadequate it sounded. He shook his head, dismissing it. "She'd have liked you. You've got her stubbornness." The comment landed like a stone in still water, rippling through me. I wanted to ask more, to know her name, her story, but his expression warned me off. Instead, I reached for a book, my fingers brushing his by accident. Neither of us pulled away. The touch wasn't much, just knuckles grazing knuckles, but it felt like a current, sharp and warm. I looked at him, and for the first time I saw something unguarded in his eyes, a need that mirrored my own. We didn't speak of it after, but the moment changed things. Our meetings grew quieter, heavier. I caught myself watching him. How his hands moved with precision. How his rare smiles softened his edges. He started asking me questions, not about work, but about me, my favorite book, why I loved old things, what I dreamed of as a kid. I answered cautiously, each word a step closer to a line I'd sworn never to cross. Then came the night that broke us open. We'd stayed late again, finalizing a grant proposal. I was exhausted, my guard fraying, when he asked out of nowhere, "Why don't you let anyone in, Clara?" I froze, my pen still. "I could ask you the same thing." He leaned back, his chair creaking. "You first." I wanted to deflect, but his gaze held me. "Because it's safer," I said finally. "People leave. They die or they disappoint you. I don't want to hurt like that again." He didn't respond right away, just watched me, his face unreadable. Then he stood, crossing to the window, his back to me. "I loved someone once," he said, his voice low. "She betrayed me, used me to climb her way up, then left. I swore I'd never let anyone that close again." The confession hung there, raw and jagged. I wanted to reach for him, to say something, but my own fear held me back. Instead, I stood grabbing my coat. "I should go." He turned, his eyes sharp. "Don't." It wasn't a command, but a plea. Our gazes locked, and for a moment, I thought he'd close the distance, pull me to him, kiss me. I wanted it. God, I wanted it, but I was terrified. My vow, my walls, my past, they all screamed at me to run. So I did, muttering an excuse about the late hour, leaving him standing there, the space between us aching with what we hadn't said. As I walked home, rain soaking through my coat, I realized I wasn't just running from him. I was running from myself, from the truth that I felt something for Elias Kane. Something real. Something that could break me if I let it. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I could keep it locked away. The days after I fled Elias's office were a haze of self-imposed exile. I buried myself in the library's stacks, sorting manuscripts with a fervor that bordered on obsession, trying to drown out the echo of his plea. Don't. My vow to stay untouched, forged in the ashes of my parents' death, had been my shield for a decade. It wasn't just about physical purity. It was about guarding my heart, keeping it safe from the kind of loss that had shattered me at 16. But Elias had cracked that armor, his quiet intensity and rare glimpses of vulnerability exposing a truth I couldn't ignore. I missed him. Not the polished executive in his glass-walled empire, but the man who'd listened to my stories of my father's poetry, who'd shared the weight of his sister's death. Running from him hadn't freed me. It had only sharpened the ache of my solitude. A package arrived at my apartment one morning. A first-edition poetry book. Keats, the same volume my father used to read at our kitchen table in that small upstate town. Tucked inside was a note in Elias's precise handwriting. Preserve what's worth keeping. No demands, no grand gestures, just a quiet tether to the moment we'd shared in his office, surrounded by storm and shadows. I clutched the book, my chest tight with the realization that I was tired of running. My independence had kept me safe, but it had also kept me alone, a ghost in my own life. That night, as the city's sirens wailed outside my window, I dialed his number, my hands trembling. We met at a small cafe near the library, a neutral space where the clink of cups and murmur of strangers felt safer than his penthouse or my cramped apartment. He was already there, his gray eyes tracking the door until they found me. He stood, pulling out a chair, but I stayed rooted, my fingers twisting the strap of my bag. "Why the book?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Because you told me about your father," he said, his tone low, deliberate. "Because you shared something real, and I don't want to lose that, or you, before we've even begun." The words landed like a stone in my chest, heavy with possibility. I sat, the space between us charged. "I'm scared, Elias," I admitted, the confession spilling out before I could stop it. "I've spent years keeping people out, keeping myself safe. Letting you in, it feels like I'm losing control." He leaned forward, his hand stopping just short of mine, respecting the boundary I hadn't voiced. "Then let me in slowly. Tell me why." I hesitated, my throat tight, but his gaze, steady and unguarded, pulled the truth from me. I told him about the accident, my parents' car skidding off an icy road, the call that came in the middle of a January night. I told him about the town that watched me grieve, their pity laced with expectations that I'd remain their perfect preacher's daughter, untouched and pure. My vow wasn't just about virginity. It was a wall against pain, a promise to never let anyone close enough to break me again. The words poured out, raw and jagged, and when I finished, tears stung my eyes. He took my hand then, his touch warm, anchoring. "I understand," he said, his voice rough with something unspoken. "More than you know." Before he could say more, his phone buzzed. His assistant's name flashed on the screen, followed by a clipped message about a crisis at Kane Enterprises. Leaked documents, a merger unraveling, whispers of sabotage tied to his ex, the woman who'd betrayed him years ago, using his trust to climb her own ladder. His face hardened, the vulnerability I'd glimpsed vanishing behind a mask of control. "I have to go," he said, standing. "This could ruin everything." "Everything," I pressed, fear coiling in my gut. "Your company or us?" He paused, his eyes locking onto mine. "Both, if I don't handle it." He left without another word, the cafe door swinging shut like a wall between us. The next 2 days were a blur of headlines. Kane Enterprises faces insider trading allegations. The news painted Elias as a ruthless tycoon, but I saw the truth in the fragments he'd shared. His sister's death, his ex's betrayal, the empire he'd built to bury his pain. He feared intimacy as much as I did, not because he didn't want it, but because it meant exposing the wounds he'd spent years hiding. I wanted to reach him, but my own fear held me back, the vow that had kept me safe now a chain pulling me under. On the third day, a call came from his assistant. Elias had collapsed during a board meeting, felled by exhaustion and what the doctors called acute emotional strain. He was in a private clinic uptown, refusing visitors, alone in his sterile fortress. My heart clenched. He was facing his crisis the way I'd faced mine, isolated, untouchable. I couldn't let that stand. Grabbing my coat and the poetry book, I took a cab to the clinic, navigating its polished halls until I reached his room. He lay pale against the white sheets, a feline snaking his arm, his face etched with fatigue. His eyes opened as I entered, surprise flickering across them. "Clara, you shouldn't be here." "I am," I said, pulling a chair close. "Because you don't have to do this alone." He turned away, his jaw tight. "I always have. My sister. She fought cancer while I was too busy building this empire. I wasn't there when she needed me. And my ex, she saw that weakness, used it to gut me. I can't afford to need anyone." The confession broke something in me. I took his hand, feeling the tremor in his fingers. "You're not weak, Elias, you're human. And I choose this, us, because you've shown me there's strength in letting someone see you." His eyes met mine, raw with fear and something softer, something like hope. "I'm a virgin," I whispered. The words a release, not a confession. "It's not just about my body, it's about my heart. I've waited because I needed to trust first, and I trust you." His gaze softened. No shock, no pressure, just a quiet acceptance that felt like home. He pulled me gently onto the edge of the bed, his arms encircling me, careful, reverent. "Then let me show you there's nothing to fear," he murmured, his voice a vow of its own. In that dim hospital room, with monitors humming softly, we built something new. His hands traced my arms, light as a whisper, each touch a promise of safety. We shared stories. His sister's love for Frost, my mother's laugh over Keats, our pasts weaving together without demand. When our lips met, it was slow, tender, a seal on the trust we'd earned. The intimacy wasn't in the physical. It was in the surrender, the way we held each other's truths without judgment, fading into a connection that needed no rush, no spectacle. The crisis resolved in the days that followed. His team traced the leak to his ex, clearing his name. The merger salvaged under his steady hand. But the true resolution was quieter. We left the hospital together, his arm around my waist as we stepped into the crisp autumn air, New York's skyline a testament to resilience. In his penthouse, we rebuilt. Not as conqueror and conquest, but as partners, sharing space, stories, and silences. My vow transformed. No longer a barrier, but a foundation for love that didn't possess but freed. Love, I learned, was the courage to be seen, the strength to hold another's heart without breaking it. In Elias's arms I found peace, not in losing myself, but in finally being found.